כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד. I know you know this. גשר צר מאוד. חזק. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד. גשר צר מאוד. עוד פעם, let's do that whole thing again. Here we go. We can do it. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד. גשר צר מאוד. גשר צר מאוד. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד. גשר צר מאוד. והעיקר, העיקר, fill it with your voices, לא לפחד, לא לפחד כלל. והעיקר, העיקר, לא לפחד כלל. ניי 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 Nay 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 כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד. גשר צר מאוד. גשר צר מאוד. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד. גשר צר מאוד. Hey, if you think I'm giving up, I'm not giving up. Not until everybody sings, all right? Here we go. We're the Smol, we don't give up. You guys ready? I want to hear just voices. If you don't know the song, you don't have to sing it. But I think you know it. Let's try this one more time. כל העולם כולו גשר גשר צר. גשר צר מאוד. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד. גשר צר מאוד. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד, לא לפחד כלל. והעיקר, העיקר, לא לפחד כלל. יא נה נה יא נה 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 יא נה 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 יא נה 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 יא נה נה לא לפחד, לא לפחד כלל. צהריים טובים, thank you very much. That was nice.
Thank you very much for this. So, good afternoon. And good evening for those who are still with us, live streaming. Welcome to the second panel, to the second plenary, which is going to take us to the end of this conference. My name is Tirza Leibowitz. I will moderate this session. A word about myself. I litigated on disability rights with Bizchut, the Israel Disability Rights Center, and later on worked on initiatives on equality and justice with the Open Society Foundations. Recently, I went back to Israel, and I'm now Deputy Director with Physicians for Human Rights Israel. And I'm part of the organizing committee here, together with Esther, Rachel, Arnold, Adi, and Sophie and Emily. I actually prepared some introductory remarks, but the first session helpfully put what we're going to be talking about into the rightful context. And it's the context of Israel waging a criminal assault of revenge and destruction on Gaza, and increasing state and settler violence in the West Bank, an occupation that continues, and state representatives increasingly declaring Palestinians in Israel a non-entity. And we spoke about that and we mentioned that. We're also in the realms of ideas. And I want to quote here a comment that Professor Yishai Rosentzvi wrote when he got notice of this conference. And he wrote in response, he said, "A community will gather," and this is us, "that understands that having a political debate without engaging with the I come from Physicians for Human Rights, with the metaphysical, religious, halachic roots." So a community will gather that understands that having a political debate without engaging with the metaphysical, religious, and halachic roots only touches the surface. And that beyond the political work, there is thought work to do. So here we're toggling between the thought, but also with reality, thought and reality. Just to take note of one of our panelists here, Hanin, who was just, I don't know if you saw Haaretz weekend edition on the front page. There's extensive coverage of the latest assault on Gaza last week. So we're toggling between reality and thoughts, and reality has to help shape our thoughts as well. So we began that thought work in the first plenary, where we started interrogating some underlying notions, underlying religious notions that affect our actions. And in this plenary, we're going to take one other crux, one other potent place that I believe requires more examination. That is underlying some of our beliefs, the language that we use, the religious language that we use, and has effect on our actions. And the focus of this panel, of this plenary, and we're especially interested in interrogating whether a commitment to a particular national political reality is part of one's religious identity or separate from it. And in particular, I think something that will come up here is to dwell on that both as a theoretical question, but also focusing on some very potent moments, which are the moments of turning from a people to a nation state. So we're going to be hearing a panoply of opinions about this. I think what's exciting is that we're going to be hearing different opinions. There are going to be some commonalities, but also some differences. And I encourage you to listen to the commonalities and to the differences. We're going to be hearing differences from within religious speak, and also reflection from outside of Jewish religion, which I think is important as well. And just to give us a lens through which to listen to this, you might want to try to listen whether we're talking about a fusion of Jewish and national, or actually a firewall between the two, and what are implications. So with that, I'd like to introduce the wonderful panel that we have here. And I'll introduce them in the order of their speaking. So we have Leah Shakdiel, an Orthodox rabbi and teacher active in interfaith dialogue and with Israeli human rights NGOs like Mahsom Watch, Darom for Peace, and Rabbis for Human Rights, with a focus on human rights, feminism, and social justice. We have Avraham Oriah Kelman, who grew up in Israel, is a teacher at several yeshivot, and is doing his PhD in religious studies at Stanford University, and is active with Bnei Avraham. We have Hanin Majadli, who is a journalist, a publicist, and an editor at Haaretz, participant in the Haaretz 21 initiative, which amplifies the voices of Palestinian citizens of Israel. Hanin is originally from Baka el-Gharbia and resides in Haifa. And finally, we have Rabbi Chaim Seidler Feller, ordained at Yeshiva University, served for many years as the executive director of the Hillel Center at UCLA, and is a founding member of Americans for Peace Now, faculty member of the Hartman Institute North America and of Wexner Heritage Foundation, and we learned from the previous session also with Land for All. So, each panelist will present a few minutes of their thoughts, and I will ask each panelist afterwards, after we hear all four, a follow-up question to tease out some commonalities, differences, and then we'll open for a few questions from the public. So with that, Rabbanit Leah Shakdiel, please.
Good afternoon. I want to say something about the place where we are, and then something about the day that we are on, and then I'll read my comments. I spoke here in 1990, before it was legal for Israelis to speak with the PLO. We would go on academic conferences abroad and not speak to each other in public, but, third person. And Rabbi Marshall Mayer, one of my heroes, invited us into this synagogue to speak, Palestinian and Israeli Jewish women. So I'm awed to be able to speak here again after so many years, more than 50 years of activity. Today is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It's also the yahrzeit of my great-grandfather who died a natural death in the Swamnik ghetto. We even had a funeral. The rest of the family went up the chimneys of Belzec. But this is also Eid Said wa Kul Am wa Intu B'Khair. And this is also the 30th of March, Yom HaAdamah, where in 1976 there were riots as a result of massive Palestinian Arab land confiscation in the north of Israel, particularly in Sachin. And it's an important date also for us, those of us who really care. What I have to say to you actually is if you remember how we started this morning with Rabbi Blau, I come from religious Zionism, his brand of religious Zionism, and what I have to say is like adding on, taking it a little further. Zionism is a revolution in Jewish identity, from victimhood to a people, which is a historical subject with responsibility, among other nations who share the same responsibility towards their respective citizenries and towards each other. In other words, Zionism means joining the modern world order of democracy. If Jews demand not only individual civil and human rights, but also the collective right to self-determination, Jews must acknowledge these same rights to others, including Palestinians. Unfortunately, most Israeli Jews today have not undergone this necessary identity conversion. They perpetuate the mentality of victims who have acquired military power, used to take unmitigated and irresponsible revenge on their enemies. Zionist responsibility requires that we keep the army for defense only, tzva hagana liYisrael, and avoid war crimes, ethnic cleansing, apartheid in the occupied territories. It means that the litmus paper test is how that Jewish nationalism deals with the non-Jews inside Israel and around it, i.e. the Palestinians and the Arab world. Just as the Dreyfus affair served as a litmus paper for France at the time, the need to choose between the values of the Ancien Régime, monarch and church, and the values of the revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité. We have to choose now between the type of victim with weapon takes revenge Jew and the type of responsible sovereign person and state within the democratic world. All of this is well put in Israel's Declaration of Statehood, the official title of the 1948 document. A, the Jewish people belongs to the land where it established its national identity, not by army, king, God knows what, no, by the composition of the Book of Books, which is a national asset as well as the gift of the Jewish people to the world, of particularist as well as universalist value. B, World War II is not only about the Shoah and the need for a safe haven. It's about the Ivri, meaning Zionist community, joining the free world of the future UN in the battle to defend freedom and justice against evil in the world at large. C, equal rights are declared for all citizens of the state, including the Palestinian Arabs, including joint economic development of the land for all, including those outside of the Jewish state. D, in the midst of the bloody attack on the Jews in Palestine, we offer peace as our vision for the future. How beautiful. How forgotten these days. It also means that as far as the public sphere goes, in law and national policy making, the only Judaism that can be Israel's civil religion, I borrow here the Jean-Jacques Rousseau terminology, the only kind of civil religion we can have is the Judaism that is compatible with democracy. It doesn't matter if it's secular, atheist, ultra-Orthodox, doesn't matter. Modern Orthodox Reform, it doesn't matter, as long as it is compatible with democratic values. I believe that the Smol Emuni is not only about prioritizing the return of the hostages of the continued war, it is also about propagating a democratic state of Israel at large. I will finish by saying something about my decision to wear this dress today, at the risk of being accused of cultural appropriation, which I understand is very big in this country. I bought this dress in a village in Mesafer Yatta, because I go there with the Mahsom Watch women. For the past 20 years, we've been going there. And recently, the situation has become so horrible that we, against our better judgment, we end up bringing food to those people whose livelihood has been totally destroyed. We bring staples such as rice, oil, sugar, you name it. And when I saw a woman sitting there embroidering, I immediately bought this dress from her. I think that as Jews, we have to, in Hebrew we say lehanchiach, to make present, even if they're not in the room, we must make present those who are the most destitute of the earth. And I don't know, minimally, I wanted to put that woman here with me on the stage.
Thank you, Leah. Avraham, please.
Hi. This is going to be quite different, but I think we're all going to the same place. כל הנערות הולכים אל הים. The Jewish nation is ancient, as ancient as the Torah and as ancient as Jewish collective memory is. But while nations could be ancient, the idea that the entire world should be governed by nation states is rather a new one. There was much that was possible and even self-evident before the rise of modern nationalism that now may seem impossible. We have, for example, plenty of historical records written in Arabic, Turkish, Hebrew, that demonstrate that Jews and Muslims, alongside other practitioners of other traditions, were pilgrimaging to the same sacred sites in the Middle East. One such place, for example, was Aaron's tomb in Petra, in Jordan. A 14th century Jew who pilgrimaged to this ancient tomb wrote about it that many people are coming to prostrate here, and the non-Jews are preserving this place in great purity for the honor of the prophet, may he rest in peace. And they honor the Jews as well and allow them to enter and prostrate. And they themselves are praying there, the Muslims. He concludes this description in a prayer, may it be that God will hear their prayers, the Muslim prayers, and our prayers. And this is not an extraordinary case. The modern nation state, however, brings with it a fundamentally different paradigm, the impossible aspiration for having one nation in its one motherland, this binding together of territory, of sovereignty, and of peoplehood, right, in one place. This is the paradigm of the nation state. In times of turmoil and conflict, this underlying belief and dream rise to the surface, and it almost automatically translated into practices of separation, such as apartheid and erasure of different kinds. Lacking other cultural resources for meaning-making and coping with crisis, what we see now unfolding in Israel-Palestine was entirely foreseeable, and many of us foresee it. The nation-state seemed to have an almost hypnotic power over us. It promises us security and freedom. What are you talking about, right? And presents itself as the ultimate carrier of our culture, tradition, and religion. I believe that our inability to distinguish ourselves from the state, in this case Israel, and its mode of thinking accounts for much of the horrors we are seeing right now. I'm not trying to say that there were no human-inflicted horrors before modern nationalism. Yet in our time, we are all pushed to be complicit with these politics and violence. We are pushed to incorporate our bodies, our minds, our hearts, to even feel in a certain ways about what is unfolding. Our Jewishness is also absorbed into these projects. In religious Zionist circles, establishing settlements in the West Bank is now considered a mitzvah, a fulfillment of the heavily debated mitzvah commandment of Yishuv Haaretz, right? Mitzvah Yishuv Haaretz. And so is, weird as it will be, bombarding Gaza. Rav Shach, one of the past greatest leaders of the Haredi world, of the ultra-Orthodox world in Israel, raised his voice against his tendencies back in the 70s and 80s. He identified the religious Zionist discourse around mitzvah Yishuv Haaretz, this commandment to settle the land, as a pseudo-halachic discourse that presents itself as religious while adopting entirely the secular national ideology. This was also his point in his discussion about the peace talks with Egypt. We should do whatever we can, he said, and give up on whatever needed to get to peace, because halachically, there is nothing that stands in the way of sustaining life, of pikuach nefesh. He dismissed the counter-arguments of the religious Zionist rabbis as nothing but national ideologies in disgust of halachic discourse. Rav Shach's opinion on military recruitment also manifests his ability to think outside of the paradigm of the nation-state. Rav Shach insisted that the decision of going to war, to put oneself in such a state of radical risk, and the decision to take other people's lives could not be taken lightly. Unfortunately, we know that governments decide on going to wars or fail to end these wars as quickly as possible, not only for security reasons, but for political and even personal reasons as well. Let me read to you from the words he said after the First Lebanon War in 1982 that are still resonating these days. We see that even great Torah scholars, he says, rabbis and righteous people are treating what happened here at the 1982 war with Lebanon as if it was a war of obligation, milchemet mitzvah. But is this truly a war of obligation? The decision to go to war was made based on a vote in the Knesset. And that vote was based on intrigues and agreements between one man and another. You say this, and I will support you if you say this and that. You take care of me, and I will take care of you, he says in Talmudic parlance, Shmor li ve'shmor lecha. They had this kind of negotiation until they reached these outcomes and made the decision to go to war. It seemed satisfactory to them, but if the intrigues had led them to the opposite results, then the voting would have been different and a different decision would have been reached. Can we rely on such decisions, says Rav Shach? Can such personal consideration guide the path of the people and determine the fate of people's life? This is just too arbitrary. This is a powerful example that the Jewish tradition can indeed provide us with an alternative vantage point from which we can examine our states critically. While the ethos of opposing army service famously persisted in the Haredi and the Orthodox community in Israel, it is hard to find any resonance to the words one of its most important leaders uttered just a few decades ago. Even the Haredi community underwent a process of Israelization that dismantled, unfortunately, their ability to raise ethical questions about Israel's policies and decisions. We need to stand firm for the ability of our tradition to be spoken of and be thought of in a way that is not corrupted by our political institutions. Not because we do not want to see Judaism in the public sphere. The opposite. We want to see it there as a critical, demanding, and inspiring voice that is not enslaved and weaponized by our states. We must allow our Jewish tradition to become the spiritual and cultural resource for a much more expansive ethical and political imagination and for otherwise modes of engaging critically with our political reality.
Thank you, and Hanin, you're welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy and honored to be here. First time in the States. So, yeah. But not first time with Jewish. I want to begin by saying that to talk about a little bit the definition of or the Palestinian identity, since a lot of people here maybe not familiar with this subject or how Palestinians different than Israelis in matters of identity and connection to the land. Okay. I want to say something else. Okay. And for me to talk about this topic, which is, identity, nationalism, Palestinian identity, it's just political, it's also an existential, question to me. What it's the experience for those who are outside of the framework of Jewish nationalism. So Palestinian indigenous identity, it's not merely a geographical or cultural or religious definition, but also a living political struggle and experience, a struggle that has shaped and continues to shape Palestinian self-definition, emerging from the experience of ongoing oppression, the experience of occupation, the experience of the Nakba and exile, and the yearning for liberation. Palestinian identity in the land is first and foremost tied to the land itself, not by justification or confirmation of a book, holy, no matter how holy this book is, but of the virtue, tokef, of life itself. And I think this is one of the paradoxes for Jewish Israelis. More than once, Israelis have told me, but Palestine is not mentioned even in the Quran. Jews and Israelis struggle to imagine beyond this framework of religious, legitimacy. But religion is also part of the Palestinian identity, both Muslims and Christian Palestinian identities, as Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Church of Annunciation, the Church of Nativity, and any other church are all part of this bond. Religion plays an unifying role here, but not an exclusive one. Palestinian Christians and Muslims in exile share the idea of return and the collective memory, And for Palestinians in general, religion does not replace nationalism, nor is it merely the other side of the same coin. It is an integral and dynamic part that adds layers and depth to identity, especially in the Holy Land. That is why the Israeli model and the Zionist model feels foreign to us. When I hear someone say, I'm half Jewish, half Italian, I can't imagine how does that work? Indigeneity here is not just a historical fact, but a political consciousness that clashes with the Zionist narrative, which claims exclusive ownership of the land. Palestinians within the border of Israel experience an indigenous national identity through a daily struggle against a state that denies their existence as a people, and their indigenous identity manifests in the fight over national existence, language, recognition of unrecognized villages and past, and the struggle to acknowledge Palestinian memory and even simple thing. I can't say I'm Palestinian without being accused as a traitor or sending me back to Syria or, I don't know, also Saudi Arabia. So, in contrast, Palestinian refugees and diaspora carry a different Palestinian identity, one that becomes more abstract as time passes, yet remains rooted in the same principle of return and historical right. And this might be tough a little bit, but one of these central questions of this conference: can democracy exist under an ideological nationalist religious regime? So it's, I feel a little bit like mitchaza, imposter here among these tzaddikim. Really, like you pick the not religious Palestinian for this panel, the religious Muslim Palestinian for this panel. But, I think it's enough to look at Israel as a living example, how it began with the ethnic cleansing of more than 500,000 Palestinians, and how today it stands accused of genocide and lethal violence in the West Bank, and in generally the brutalization of the Israeli society, to understand that this paradox can't really exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanin. And Chaim, please.
I welcome you, Hanin, as a tzaddikah, so you join us. I've been waiting for this conference for 50 years. Because I wanted an opportunity to see Leah again. I don't think we've seen each other since the 80s. It's a long time. And I'm overwhelmed by the response and by the work that was done. I thank you. Thank you, Thank you for what you've done and what you've given us. You've given us a gift. You've given us the gift of conversation, of being able to talk openly with one another. Let's hold on to that, because it's absent in our community. In 1958, my teacher, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, presented the following in a public lecture. The Jew has experienced persecution and brutality. We never had a state. We never had political power. What if we had a state in the Middle Ages? How would we have acted? Just like the feudal lords? Or would we have acted differently because of Jewish values? Who knows? Now with the state of Israel, the test has come. We're facing the test. Will we behave like any other state ethically? Will we restrain ourselves from engaging in certain injustices, so to say practices which are in conflict with basic Judaic ethics? Or will we yield to temptation? Here we have an opportunity. The Jews are the rulers. They legislate the laws. They are, so to say, the masters. Will we act like masters? Or will we understand that Judaism doesn't know the concept of master and slave, victor and vanquished, powerful and weak? This is my problem with regards to the state of Israel. The whole of Jewish history will be interpreted in terms of what the state of Israel will do in the next 50 years. If the state of Israel doesn't live up to Jewish ethics, people will reinterpret Jewish history in a whole different light. The question is not whether Israel will defeat the Arabs on the field of battle, but whether we'll defeat our evil within our own community and be victorious in this field. To me, this is the most important problem. 1958. What's the judgment? What's the decision? This is the question. Can there be an ethically principled and restrained Jewish nationalism? And what role will Judaism play in relation to that nationalism? There was a famous conversation between Ben-Gurion and someone whose spirit somehow hangs over us today, the scientist, philosopher, gadfly Yeshayahu Leibowitz. Leibowitz confronted Ben-Gurion and asked, "Why did you, Ben-Gurion, an avowed secularist, establish a chief rabbinate?" And Ben-Gurion responded, "You, Leibowitz, you seek the separation of religion and state so that religion can return to being an independent factor with which the ruling government has to contend. You want religion to be in opposition. I reject this separation because I want the state to hold religion in its hand. That is, I want politics to control religion." Ben-Gurion was a clever, even autocratic politician. He carried the day, and we are paying for it. I want to remember that in 1967, there were only 2 ministers in the government who voted against responding to Jordan. There were the two religious ministers, cabinet ministers in the government, because they said, what are we going to do when we capture the territory? What a question to ask. What are we going to do with the Palestinians who we have no plan? Right? That's the answer. The religious ministers, the only ones who opposed. But we are gathered here today, I think, to proclaim that we're the students of Soloveitchik and Leibowitz and not of Ben-Gurion. I do want to reclaim the honor of Judaism so that our religious values act as a check and a control on the excesses of a Jewish statist nationalism, so that the nationalism, the le'umiyut, doesn't become chauvinism, le'umanut. Front and center in my mind is Rav Amiel's admonition that nationalism is the idolatry of our time. And the concomitant challenge is, will our nationalism be different? Maybe that's arrogant to think that it can be different. What I intend to do in the time allotted is to offer a textual example of religion as a restraint on nationalism, and then outline the elements of a nationalism of values. That is what I call a Zionism of values a la Achad Ha'am, as against a Zionism of power a la Jabotinsky. I would have liked to talk to you a little bit about why modern orthodoxy has gone off the rails and been transformed into a political lobby with a tallis. But maybe we can discuss that. We could discuss that in the questions and answers. My text is familiar to many of you. It's the first Rashi in the Chumash. Rashi asks, why does the Torah begin, our book, why does our book not begin with our laws, but with the creation of humanity? And Rashi answers, according to the standard reading, indeed, the Torah does begin with our law, the law that we have an absolute right to the land that's been promised. That is, since God is the creator, God is the grand real estate agent who can decide who gets God's property. At first, God gave it to the Canaanites, but after they lost their right, God gave it to us for keeps. I'd like to propose a different understanding, where Rashi is saying God is no longer a power broker, but a moral educator. That's God's real job. In this reading, Rashi is actually saying that the Creator transmits the right to the land conditionally, and that just as the Canaanites forfeited their right because they failed to maintain a standard of morality, so too could we lose our right if we're not virtuous. The land will vomit us out. Rather than granting us a free ride, the Torah, true to character, opens with a warning and a demand that if we are to dwell in the land of promise, we must live up to that promise. In this way, our religious guidebook, at the outset, at the very beginning, lays down the moral principle that is to serve as a control on unrestrained nationalism. The elements of a value-based nationalism to which I aspire are the following, and I'm going to sort of outline. Element number one, an inclusive nationalism, where the other is our brother. When I first met David Hartman in 1979, he said to me, the most important religious question that we face is how to govern a minority. That's when I knew that I had found my teacher. It's not an accident that my teachers were Jews who stressed traditional Judaism that was grounded in ethics, both Rabbi Soloveitchik and his student Hartman. As Yitzhak Rabin wrote to Jonathan Sachs in 1995, quote, "We did not pray for nearly two millennia for the return to Zion, only to find ourselves ruling over another people. The occupation," end quote, "the occupation is the most un-Jewish of projects from a religious perspective. We must struggle with all our considerable energy to end the occupation." Element number 2, a consciousness that having returned to the land, we are simultaneously both at home and humble strangers in that very land. As Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz, the Shalach HaKadosh, wrote, who left Prague for Tzfat and Jerusalem in the 16th century, wrote the following, and I quote, "The principle that has derived is that those who dwell in the land must, as a consequence of their being in a state of submission, nichna'im, a land that humbles, act like strangers, and not make the main object to settle in a permanent, steadfast manner, as was expressed by King David, who said, 'I am a stranger in the land.'" Read George Steiner. You'll see a reflection of this idea. We are all guests in this world. If we could only learn that we're all guests, the world would be a very different place. Element number 3, the wisdom, I have got to go quickly. Element number 3, the wisdom that human life is to be privileged over territory. As Rabbi Soloveitchik declared, "I know something about the sanctity of the land of Israel, but I am aware of another sanctity, the sanctity of each human being. And when the moment arrives when we have to make a determination, then the sanctity of human life will be a deciding factor. That will take precedence over territory." Element number 4, war must be a last resort, not a political option. This was the profound teaching of Rabbi Moshe Avigdor Amiel, who was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv from 1935 to 1946. He wrote, and I quote, "Truly, God proclaimed only one war to be obligatory, a milchemet mitzvah, an obligatory war, and that is the war against the war of Amalek. It is the war against wars in general," end quote. Our task, our noble mission as a nation, according to Rav Amiel, is to champion the book against the sword, and in the name of Torah and God, educate others to defeat the impulse to warfare. Milchemet HaTorah neged HaMilchama. What a noble idea. The war of the Torah against all wars. Do we know that? Do we learn that? And finally, element number 5, the abiding truth, as Leibowitz asserted again and again, is that the state is only an apparatus, an instrument where we have an opportunity to see if Judaism, this is me, to see if Judaism works as we attempt to build a moral society. There can be no holiness attached to the state, that's idolatry, nor any messianic significance. The only religious significance of the state is as a laboratory for the fulfillment of our ideals of justice, equality, and peace. As David Hartman wrote, religious Zionism does not need to treat the rise of Israel as a divine ruse on the way toward realizing the Messianic kingdom. In Israel, the moral quality of the army, social and economic disparities and deprivations, the exercise of power, attitude towards minorities and the stranger, tolerance and freedom of conscience, all these are realms that may engage our sense of covenantal responsibility. Finally, in conclusion, a word about Pesach, and from my teacher, from Rabbi Soloveitchik. He asked the question, how come when we recite the Arami Ovei Ravi passage, the Wandering Aramean passage, even though the Mishnah requires that we read the entire passage, we don't comment and we don't recite the last verse, Vayevienu el hamakom hazeh, you brought us into this land. There are classic answers to this. The answer he offers is as follows, that the land of Israel is only the destination. Sinai is our destiny. The question before us is, can we bring our destiny, Sinai, to bear on our destination, on the land of Israel? The future of Israel is at stake, as well as the future of Judaism, and it's in our hands to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I came to this panel hoping for an answer to the question about the ascription of religious significance to political developments, to statehood, etc. I actually don't think that we got a clear answer here from any of the speakers, but that is fine, because I think we heard some really important other points, and I want to point at a few of them, and from them draw just a follow-up question for each of the panelists. First of all, Hanin, you put forward central piece, indigeneity, and I think that we had the privilege of hearing a Palestinian perspective of indigeneity, of connection to the land, which I don't know that we have many chances to hear, and thank you for that. And a question that I will put to you, not to answer right now, but going forward is, it struck me, Leah, that when you were talking about your address, and you were mentioning Musafir Yatta, one of the villages that is being actively displaced these days, you mentioned the need to bring presence to those women, to those places. And my question to Hanin would be, what are ways that you would say would bring presence to, let's take for example, the people of Musafir Yatta or other aspects of the injustice towards Palestinian. So that's a question for you, but I'm going to go through a couple of other questions. For Avraham, you brought forward, and I think all three other panelists spoke about the nation state. And Avraham, you were challenging that notion of a nation state, and I was just wondering if you could just say a few words about, if you can say what you mean by nation state without using the word nation state, so it's kind of clear. And given that you are challenging that notion, and given your familiarity with Israeli society and Jewish society, what are other options, and is it feasible? Is it something that those who agree with you can actually, bring into reality? Okay. And then I would ask both Leah and Chaim. It strikes me, I think there's agreement among all panelists, or most, about the need for religion to serve as checks and controls over nationalism. I think that there's probably agreement in this room. But I do want to ask, what has changed between now and you mentioned 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 30 years ago? I think some people were saying the same thing. And, how long and even I think either Chaim or Leah, you said the next 50 years, the test for the next 50 years. We don't have 50 years. We have a people that is under near annihilation, and we have another people that doesn't think it is, but it maybe also is. And so what do you think changes? How do you account for the urgency, given what's happening on the ground now when you talk about your ideas? How do you account for the urgency? So, Hanin, if we can begin with you about giving presence to Palestinians, how would you describe that?
I might want to answer in Hebrew, so I won't get lost in translation, at least my intention. So, can you repeat it again, and can you translate me?
The question is, we heard, in this case, Leah, talk about giving presence to the injustice to Palestinians, and I'm asking you if we're thinking about giving presence to the people of Musafir Yatta or other parts of Palestinian society that are under attack. What would be your take on Jews or Israelis giving presence?
איך להנכיח אותם ואיך לעזור לנוכחות שלהם. תראי, אני לא אוהבת את התפקיד הזה של להגיד מה כן צריך לעשות, כי אני לא החכמה הכי גדולה, יש עוד אנשים שאולי יש להם הצעות יותר טובות, אבל אני אגיד משהו מהחוויה האישית שלי, שאני חושבת שהוא בעייתי, ושהרבה פעמים ישראלים, ואני מבינה גם מאיפה זה מגיע מתחושת ומהמציאות שהם החזקים ומתחושת הרוב בשטח. הרבה פעמים...
רגע, חנין. So Hanin is saying, I don't like being placed in the position of having to be, to give the smart solution, because I don't necessarily have the smartest solution, but I do want to share some problematic aspect of that Israelis I believe in Cantor from the place of feeling strong and of being a majority.
אני חושבת הרבה פעמים ישראלים חוטאים בהבנה של התפקיד שלהם. יש להם תפקיד מאוד חשוב ככובשים, כן, לעשות את החובה המוסרית ולהתנגד לכיבוש ולהתנגד לאלימות ולהיות ליד הפלסטינים. אדרבה, מיכאל מנקין דיבר על presence of וזה מאוד חשוב. זה אחד, אני חושבת שנכון לעכשיו בישראל, הדבר הכי חשוב שיהודים עושים זה הדבר הזה. זה לא רק פיקוח נפש, וזה לא רק יפות נפש, זה מציל חיים של פלסטינים.
So I believe that Israelis חוטאים, miss out, how would you say?
Sin.
I think, miss the mark, I think.
דמייני שאני הייתי צריכה לחשוב על זה.
Miss the mark in understanding their role as the ones who are in the position of occupiers to resist occupation, right? To reject, to oppose occupation. One aspect, I believe what you're saying, Hanin, is yes, protective presence. That's one of the most important things that can be done, which is not only pikuach nefesh, but it actually saves lives.
אז אני חושבת שהרבה פעמים הם חושבים שהם הסיפור, ושרק אם הם יהיו שם, אז במונחים של הם הכוכב של הסין, וזה גם הרבה פעמים, או באופן ישיר, מתורגם לזה שישראלים לא מצליחים לתת לפלסטינים לדבר, ולהגיד, ולספר את הסיפור שלהם. ויש בזה מן היהירות שהיא לא, זאת אומרת, היא לא גזענית או מאופיינת רק ליהודים, אלא הרוב השולט החזק, ויש פה גם קצת צביעות עולמית. נגיד ראינו בשנה וחצי האחרונות בכל מה שקשור למלחמה, שהיה מאוד קשה למצוא פלסטינים שמדברים על הג'נוסייד ועל המלחמה ועל הכיבוש ועל החיים עצמם בכלל, בלי כל יהודי ישראלי במיוחד שיאשר את הדברים. כאילו שהפלסטיני לא יכול לעמוד בפני עצמו ושהעולם יקשיב לו והוא צריך שותף ישראלי. אני חושבת שהשותפות הזאת...
Although I think 50% at least understand what you're saying. If I understand correctly, this is Tirza speaking, Hanin, you're making the distinction between protective presence, yes, but not to mistake that with Israelis or Jewish Israelis believing that they are the center of the story. That if only they were there, you know, it's up to them. That there is conceit in the approach, which is not, Hanin was saying, it's not necessarily out of racism. It's just out of
political position.
The political position, I think the place of power,
Yeah.
which could happen in other places of power as well. Hanin was also referencing global hypocrisy, whereby in the last year and a half, it was rare to find a situation where a Palestinian could get up and state what is happening and be given credit and being given credibility for that without having a Jewish voice in support and saying, yes, that is true.
באופן אישי הרבה פעמים שאלתי את עצמי בשנה וחצי האחרונות, האם לי נותנים את ההזדמנות או את הכבוד לדבר בגלל שאני פלסטינית שיש לה, אתה יודעת, קול ביקורתי, או כי אני עובדת בהארץ לצורך העניין. אין לי תשובה עדיין.
Let me just say, Hanin says, for my part, it wasn't clear to me when I was given the space to speak, whether it was because I'm a journalist in Haaretz or because I have a critical voice as a Palestinian.
ואני רוצה להתייחס לסרט No Other Land שראינו, שהיה נושא הפאנל שלי ושל מיכאל מקודם, ואולי זה לא קשור בדיוק לשיחה שלנו, ואולי כן, ולהגיד שהיופי בסרט הזה ולמה הוא שונה, או לא הסרט, אלא בעצם השיתוף בין יובל ובאסל, הוא שלהבדיל מדורות על גבי דורות של אקטיביסטים ישראלים מסוג מסוים, יובל לא ראה בעצמו המושיע שיבוא יגאל את הפלסטינים ויצלם אותם ויעשה עליהם סרט, אלא הוא עצמו מרוקן מכל תחושת בעלות ותחושת טהרנות ותחושת הגואל הישראלי, הגואל יפה הנפש, והוא שם את עצמו עם באסל, שניהם נראים בני דודים, אבל באמת בני דודים, וזה היופי של זה. אני רוצה להמשיך ולהגיד על זה עוד משהו, אבל... ואז אני אסיים.
Hanin is referencing the film No Other Land for those who were here in the breakout group. Different from generations of activists, in this film, the Israeli Jewish activist Yuval did not see himself as the redeemer, as someone who is going to come and film and make a movie about what is happening to the Palestinians, but he actually emptied himself from a sense of ownership and of being a redeemer and put himself with the people in the struggle. I hope I captured what you were saying. Yeah. And you wanted to make one more point? Yeah.
אולי מספיק פוינטס. אני יכולה לדבר עוד שעה, אבל לא מספיק. Thank you so much.
So I was asked about what is nationalism, right? Or what is the nation state, and what practicalities does opposing it could mean now. So the nation state for me, like what I started by distinguishing between the nation state and nationhood. I think nations are ancient. Collective identities are ancient. Peoples are ancient, especially the Jewish people. But nation state is a particular political institution that is binding a certain nation to a certain place and claiming 100% sovereignty of this nation on this place, and therefore, by definition, as I see it, rejecting the possibility of other people in this place as having power. So it's something very essential, as I see it, to the notion of, also in the case of Israel. And it's always coming into conflict with other, it's always translated, as I said, like it's always translated into ethnic cleansing of some kind or apartheid of some kind, because there is always more than one nation in one place, because the world is mingled and people are all over the place. And it's never as beautiful and separate as we imagine it sometimes. So with the rise of modern nationalism in the 19th century, we saw many nations doing exchange of peoples and forced migrations, and there were so many refugees coming out of these processes, culminating with the genocide of the Jewish people, right, in the Holocaust. So this is about how I see the nation state. What I think is the applicability. Yeah, so it's a. I'm not. There are many political ideas of how to translate this kind of paradigm into a political paradigm. How to make that into a policy. I think Land for All is one example of thinking beyond how we can think of Jews and Palestinians living in Israel, Palestine, not entirely separated from each other. For me, the idea of separation is a nightmare. I can't imagine Israel without Palestinian in it. And the more we are separating and creating different roads and different systems for Israelis and Palestinians, the less I can recognize something I can identify as home. So this is for me crucial. But I think even before we jump into political discussion, we are not the government. We are a minority. We are a resisting minority. We are a strong opposing minority. But we are in exile, in political exile within Israel. And we should internalize the fact that we are in exile, that Israel is exiled just like it's different because it's the Holy Land, because it's our homeland in so many ways. And yet, we are in political exile within this place. It is run by people who are opposing every single religious commitment I can imagine I have. So I don't recognize myself within anyone who is sitting currently in the government. So there is no reason I would think of myself as reflected there, or would imagine what they need to do with their political institution. So we need to think we need to regress in a way to get back into the place we are actually in, which is, again, in an exilic reality. And from there, from this existential place of going back to the ethical commitments of Jews in exile, I think we can also aspire to, it's not apolitical, right? Because we have our ethical commitments, we are going to Mesapariata, we are with the people of Mesapariata, right? This is the call of the hour, for example. And from this place, I believe that people who are basing their identity on such a conception could also, if we will happen to be in the government in the future, will also bring these values into political reality as well. But we're not quite there yet.
Thank you, Avraham. And since a couple of times the land for all was mentioned as some kind of an idea that where there are actual actors who are trying to create a program out of it, I do want to mention that there are other ideas as well. And one of them is Medinat Kol Ezracheha, a state of all its citizens, which also actually has a party in the Knesset. And I'm mentioning it because obviously, I don't know how much people are aware here, but it is increasingly portrayed and seen as an illegitimate option. And we're not here to litigate. We're not, as you say, we're not there. We're not at the solution stage. We're at the resistance stage. But I think it is important to know and to acknowledge that there are different ways to think about what a future could look like. So I'd like to ask both Leah and Chaim if you can round it off with your historical perspective, and if you see, and again, how do you account for the call and the urgency which you yourselves express, but in what ways is what's happening now different, and how can we approach it differently?
I'm 73 years old. It is difficult to teach an old dog new tricks. And like old Cato in the Roman Senate, I'm not sure I'm going to say anything new. I've been saying this for the past 50 years. And I went to live at Yerucham in the Negev because I was opposed to going to the territories like members of my generation. And my whole life work is about the urgency of bringing together the various agendas of what democracy is about for the state of the Jewish people, which is the state of Israel. Be it social justice for the non-European Jews, the Sfaradim, and by the way, it hasn't been mentioned enough here, but the Smol Emuni, unlike previous groups of like Oz V'Shalom in the Israeli left, this is a group that is inclusive of the Mizrahi voice, including what Mizrahi rabbis have written over the years, but also current activists coming out of the young Mizrahi, non-Ashkenazi generation. So the urgency of bringing that agenda together with feminism. I cannot tell you how many times when I became famous for my feminism, it was impossible to convince people that I cannot be a liberal feminist because I don't think that feminism stands by its own. It's part of the whole agenda of justice. And then you talk about the Bedouins, our neighbors, and you talk about the Palestinians, and you talk about whatever you want, everything else, if it doesn't come together as a democratic agenda. And democracy is a win-win situation. It's not a win-lose. It goes against the habit to think in terms of win-lose. that in order for me to thrive, I must make sure that the other person, I don't know, gets beaten out of the game. No, democracy is about win-win. Nobody has everything that they want. Everybody has less than they want. Why? Because having less than I want is the only way for everybody to have at least the minimum, which means that it will be better for me too. That's what democracy is about. And I believe in this kind of Judaism also, in about being a very proud religious Jew, but meeting with a very proud Palestinian, okay, religious Muslim, and together we need to make room for all of us to live in the same land. I hear you, Avraham. I must tell you that to the best of my knowledge, as I said, an old dog, without new tricks, I do not see any other solution except the two-state solution. I don't see it coming. I don't think that the Palestinians between the river and the sea and elsewhere in the whole world, I don't think that the idea of not having a Palestinian state is really popular anywhere. And I don't see the Jewish people, the Israeli Jewish people, giving up on the idea of a state for the Jewish people. I don't see this. Not that this nationalism is holy, not that the nation state is, I don't know, God-given truth or a law of nature. It is not. But it seems to me to be a relatively workable solution for a world which is a tapestry of different groups. The question is, how does each of those groups learn to express itself proudly without actually beating out of existence the other groups? That's a big challenge. And I think that we've been there for a long time. I don't see any other way for the nearest future. The urgency is this. The urgency is to listen to the families of those who are still captives in Gaza, not just because those 59 people are human lives that need to be saved, but because they bring forward the real values, the values of life, the need for peace, the need to end the war because life is more important than revenge. They teach us all a lesson. They are now at the forefront of what needs to be heard. So that, to me, is urgent.
I agree with Leah. All right. So first of all, what I learned from Avraham is that exile has to become part of our Zionism. That's something that we haven't considered before. That exile, the notion of exile, has enormous value in terms of what we learned for 2,000 years. Zionism tried to overcome that experience and to redefine us as a national people, and left behind that dimension, that from where we actually, that was the laboratory where we generated the values that we now have to bring to bear. So it's important for us to maintain that perspective. That's number one. Number two.
We're always gerim.
Always. We're always gerim, exactly. Right? Now, the next thing is that the problem of how to integrate minorities into national enterprises is a universal problem. It's not just a Jewish problem. I wish we could address it from that perspective and not think that we're right. We're not right. But you know what? No one else has solved this problem. Maybe here in the United States we're working on it. We've been working on it, and we were making some progress in the United States until fairly recently in terms of addressing this issue. And this is the issue for contempt for the structures of government in our world, and we need to address them. It's not going to happen by exploding them. They're not going to be destroyed, those national enterprises. How do we then exploit our current circumstance to move? I'm going to get to that in a second. Regarding separation, I agree completely. That's why we affirm. I don't think we've defined what Eretz Kulam is. It's a two-state based approach with open borders. That's all I'm going to say. And that the people who live where they live, they continue to live there. The Jews live in Palestine as citizens of Israel, but legal residents of Palestine, and Palestinians come to Israel to live. There's a return, I mean, it's complicated, but they become citizens of Palestine and legal residents of Israel. We can talk about it later on. And finally, what's changed? So first of all, in our early years, when we were younger, we carried with us the memory of the Shoah. We're still carrying the memory of the Shoah. Then we developed an arrogance, the arrogance of power. As I talk about, when I move away from the Shoah and I talk about the arrogance of power, I think about our American experience. What's going on today is the Vietnam of the Jews. Those of us who are old enough to remember Vietnam, remember the shock that we had to confront about the morality of the American behavior. Now, American military operates according to certain moral principles. The Jews are not the only army that has moral principles. It's important for us to learn that, right? And we violated those moral principles. This is our Vietnam, and we have to see how we emerge out of the crisis. It's a crisis. That's what happens in the natural growth of states. This is our crisis, and the way in which we confront it, this conversation that's going on, couldn't have happened until this crisis. That's what's so interesting. So now we have to grow from that experience, unfortunately, from the experience of devastation and of destruction. But maybe we can create me'az yatsa matok, right? Remember, hara kisei latov, the Baal Shem Tov taught us. Evil is the throne of good. Can we transform the evil in which we find ourselves into a positive direction and growth?
Thank you. Thank you, Chaim. And I would, to end the evil, I would, the first things first, let's end the assault. Let's end, right? And also just, posing kind of a challenge in the air. You were talking about integrating minorities. We can also think about a situation where you have 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Jews, and so maybe it's not about integrating minorities anymore. Hanin, I know you wanted to make one comment, so let's make it short. Let's take then a few comments and we'll wrap up.
רציתי להגיד על הדבריו האחרונים בקשר לשתי מדינות, או מה הפתרון האולטימטיבי והנכון. אני לא חושבת שהבעיה היא מחסור בפתרונות, אני חושבת הבעיה היא בזה שמדינת ישראל לא רוצה למצוא פתרון. אני חושבת שפלסטינים יכלו כן גם להסכים לשתי מדינות, אלה מבקרים את אלה חיים שם, לא יודעת מה, נערף, ומדינה אחת ביום מן הימים. אז פתרונות יש מלא, כוונה ורצון ליישם, זה כבר סיפור אחר.
I think I will translate because it's probably the one thing that actually I think all four panelists agree on, right? That there isn't a dearth of solutions, quote unquote, and it's, one can have a discussion about what's the ultimate solution. The problem is that the state of Israel is not intending to reach a solution. So that is the problem. So let's take a few comments. I know we have the microphones in the room. I think we'll take 3 comments so we can end on time.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. We've been speaking a lot about religion and a lot about politics. What I haven't heard spoken a lot about is the ways in which money and finance is incredibly important to this. And in when we talk about a settler colonial project, when we talk about a nation state, the way in which it's maintained is through money. It's through our tax dollars as Americans as well. It's not any sort of coincidence that here in America we have police forces that are acquiring military technology that was created in Israel. And to be an American Jew and to have a connection to the Holy Land and to not to ignore that, to me, it feels an incredible falsehood. And when it comes to one of the small freedoms that we have to protest this, for example, through boycott, divestment, and sanctions, that is now being criminalized. So I'm wondering if anybody has any perspective on how we as American Jews can take a stance with our tax dollars and with our individual financial contributions.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Let's take two other comments or questions. I think we had someone in the back there, Adi. Yes.
Hi, thank you all so much. All of your words were incredibly meaningful. I have a specific question as someone who plans to make Aliyah, as one could call it, or move to the land and sort of live my life out as, a peacenik, Smol Emuni, as well as becoming involved with the Israeli professional world as I need to get a job. And a specific question, perhaps, for Rabbanit, Shakdiel, and for Avraham, about what day-to-day life is like as somebody going very far against the prevailing political culture, going against the grain as religious Jews living in Israel. And also your thoughts on me as a religious Jews who with the best of intentions plan to move to Israel and live out their life there. Perhaps in the name of Zionism and an ongoing colonial project, whether that is a good thing for good, well-intentioned American Jews to do, and if that is such a good thing, what difficulties we might face and what your advice might be for us, and basically where to go, some guidance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll take one more question, please, in the back.
There were hearings in Congress in the 1930s where Reinhold Niebuhr, who was then a socialist firebrand, said, we've got to get the Arabs out of Palestine so that the Jews can take over. And David Ben-Gurion went up to him and said, thank you so much for saying what we cannot ourselves say. He was then saying it's going to be great for both sides. Ben-Gurion, not Jabotinsky. My point is that there's been, since the beginning of this process, a desire of mainstream Zionists and later Israelis to just get rid of the Arabs whatever way possible. And I found the rhetoric today beautiful and moving, but it's not dealing with that fundamental fact that the majority of Israelis then and now have just wanted a country for Jews with as few Arabs, ideally zero, if possible.
Thank you. I'll just say to that I think Avraham said it well. We are in a time of opposition, of resistance, of a minority, and we will have to. Thank you. We'll take one more, if you can make it very, very short.
Leah, you touched on this briefly about the contribution that Sephardim have made, and I'm curious, as someone who goes to a Sephardic congregation and has Sephardic family members both here in the U.S. and in Eretz Yisrael, and I see them being even more right-wing than the average Jewish community. I'm curious how Sephardim have become involved in Smol Emuni, what you think we can contribute to this discussion, and what role do you think we can continue to play?
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we're going to round this up in 2 minutes, and we'll do it this way. The question that you raised now, I think, is very important, and I'm going to give a shout-out to Michael. Michael, are you? Yeah? Please, Michael, and what's your name? Jonathan, please be in touch, because that's a living issue for Smol Emuni, and there are Sephardi and Mizrahi constituencies, so you'll have a conversation. I would like to ask for 2 responses from the panel, and I'm going to ask Leah and Avraham, if I can put you on the spot, very, very short. Leah, that question of what kind of hardships to expect, and any advice, if you can do it in 2 sentences. And Avraham, we heard a question here about the issue of finance. I would turn it into a question of, for you as an Israeli, you're now in the States, but as an Israeli who has your beliefs, what is the role of the American Jewish community? What would you want them to be fighting for that can help your struggle for what you believe in? So, Leah, please.
My answer to all the question is, come to Yerucham. You want to see a community which is pluralistic, ethnically variant, many different things that you can do in a place like Yerucham, with the Bedouins, with the Jews in Yerucham, different things. Don't go to a place which just gives you one thing. Go to a place like Yerucham that can show you a lot of things. things and can expose you also to the, can I say something about the money issue? I have to say something about that. Look, the ammunition industry plays an important role in what is going on here. Should listen to somebody like Avidan Friedman talk about that. You export weapons, including vicious apps, okay, and computer programs, and you need to prove that they have been used in real battle. Otherwise, you cannot sell them. You see? So one thing you can do is mitigate capitalism, okay? That's one thing you can do.
Okay, this is an explosive question, obviously.
No pun intended.
I would not be the one who will criminalize any Palestinian or pro-Palestinian non-violent action, including those who are against Israel, as far as they are not supporting an active violence against Israelis. At the same time, I would say, following a recent book of Mahmoud Mamadani, Nor Settler, Nor Native, there he argued that, even when we think about such nonviolent measures, we should be smart and not do it like in a foolish way. And being smart means to collaborate with Israelis who are working on the land at the same time as you're divesting from military industry and so on. So to be attentive on what exactly are you fighting against, and not ending up playing to the hands of extremists from both sides who are trying to perpetuate this ongoing conflict forever. So this is a strategic, really, debate that I'm having here with some people.
Thank you. We've come to an end of this plenary, and before I hand it back to Rachel, who's going to give the closing words, I just want to say something that I'm taking away from this very rich plenary is not so much what the solution is going to be, and already we spoke about that's not what's being litigated here. But I think what came up clearly is that the conditions for a real conversation about solution has to come from a place of equality. And to reach that place, we know what has to happen. Occupation has to happen. Apartheid has to be eliminated. Sorry, occupation has to end. Apartheid has to be eliminated. Inequality has to be eliminated. From that place, the people can talk equally about what the solutions are. Thank you very much.
So I'm Rachel Landsberg. I'm one of the organizers with Smol Emuni US, and together with the other members of the organizing team for our conference, Adi, Arnold, Emily, Esther, Sophia, and Tirza, I want to thank the Wasserman Jewish Studies Center at Baruch College for hosting this event with us. I want to thank BJ for working to accommodate us literally at the last minute when we outgrew our initial space. I want to thank all of our speakers and moderators for saying yes to come, for all of the work you put into planning to be here today, and for sharing so openly of yourself. It was really an amazing day. Thank you. I want to thank the volunteers and those who generously donated to make this conference possible. And finally, I want to thank each of you in the audience for coming here. It's been a moving day and empowering, I think, for us to be together in community. So I have the difficult task of closing out the conference, trying to capture in a few words our intentions for this conference, the actual journey we have taken together over the course of the day, and where we are headed next. What our charge is. As we do, when faced with a difficult task, I turned to the Torah. And I landed upon Yitro. What can Yitro offer us about why we are here, where we're going next, and what tomorrow can look like? In Parak Yud Chet, chapter 18 of Sefer Shmot, Yitro sees that Moshe is sitting as a judge from morning until night, handing down decision after decision after decision to members of Bnei Israel. Yitro sees that this is simply not sustainable. The current system is not workable. In response, Yitro tells Moshe openly and directly, Lo tov hadavar asher ata oseh. The thing you are doing is not good. Moshe heeds Yitro's advice and implements a radically new judicial system. I want to note just a few essential aspects of the narrative that I think may be instructive for us. Firstly, Yitro is an outsider. Sometimes change is spurred by someone who is a bit removed, who has a different perspective, and who can see the situation from a different vantage point. Secondly, although Yitro is not one of the Israelites, nonetheless, he is family. The text initially introduces Yitro as Kohen Midyan Choten Moshe. His status of priest of Midyan, of Kohen, comes first, and his status as father-in-law comes second. But the text not once after that mentions that Yitro is a priest, whereas the rest of the chapter over and over again uses the word choten. 13 times we see the word, emphasizing their bond as father-in-law and son-in-law. Their relationship is central and underlies the narrative, making it possible for Moshe to accept Yitro's advice. Finally, the text uses many verbs that further characterize Yitro and the active and engaged way he works to build relationships. Vayishma, Yitro hears all that has happened to Bnei Israel. Vayikach, Yitro takes Moshe's wife and sons. Vayavo, Yitro comes to Moshe and reunites with him. He doesn't stay separate. Vayishachavu, vayishak lo, vayishalu ish l're'ehu l'shalom. They bow one to the other, they kiss, they ask about each other, all expressions of love and commitment to the relationship. Vayichad, Yitro rejoices. We get a fuller picture of the quality of their relationship and what they have built with each other. The next morning, the text tells us, Vayar, Yitro sees. Yitro sees everything that Moshe is doing for the nation, sitting all day and judging. And at this point, Yitro is in actually a very good position to bring new light to bear on the situation. Yitro brings his outsider perspective, as well as his love for and deep connection to Moshe, to bring a different viewpoint to the situation. He has listened, he has seen that there is something that is not workable, and then he chooses to speak up. Yitro challenging what he sees and offering an alternative path forward is not foreign to our tradition. To the contrary, we have 70 faces of Torah. We are taught to turn over Torah over and over again in search of new interpretations. We have centuries of internal debate with each other under our belt. Our rabbis of antiquity, in their wisdom, preserve the minority opinion in our oral tradition. We rely on critique and challenge and reassessment and open conversation. We always have. At this juncture, all the more so. We need new minds, new perspectives, new paths forward, new Torah. Making space for differences of opinion is crucial. Yitro's Torah is a Torah of centering relationships, of empathy and connection. It is a Torah of deciding to truly look and see the other and then make needed changes. Yitro's Torah is also one of speaking up and out, of disagreeing, of offering course corrections, and of interrupting mistakes. So how do we build the courage we need to say what is in our hearts, to ask the hard questions, to delve into the Torah yet again, and draw out the messages and the learnings and the values that are needed in this moment? Firstly, we have to dare to really look and listen and learn and understand what the reality is on the ground. This will mean being uncomfortable, horrified, and heartbroken. And that will help propel us forward in search of new pathways. Secondly, we do it together. We build courage alongside each other. We create community. And I invite you to look around the room, see the faces here now, to picture those on live stream, and thank you for being with us, live streamers, and to know that there are also others who aren't here yet, but our task is to go find them and bring them to join us. So we hope this conference can serve as a model for how to engage in hard conversations while simultaneously building community. Although this conference was geared towards the observant American Jewish community, we decided to bring together Jewish Israeli voices, Palestinian voices, and American Jewish voices. This was by design. All of these voices have a place in the conversation, and each will be necessary in order to move forward together. As American Jews, we have a perspective from some distance, an outsider's view that is necessary. We need the dynamic of Israel and diaspora in partnership. This is a partnership that has existed since the beginning of the exile, and it is needed now. We also have influence in decisions being made here in the US in relation to Israel, and we need to use that influence. As observant religious Jews, it is incumbent upon us to be in conversation with Palestinians. We can and should listen and see and then seek action together to stop the war and dismantle structures of oppression. As we do that, we reclaim Judaism. We lift up our Jewish values, and we restore our dignity and our humanness. I want to close by stating what I hope is the obvious, and it's been stated earlier today, the real urgency of the moment, right now. We can't afford to wait. So what is our call to action? I ask, I beseech, I invite you to use this conference to help each of us find the courage and the resolve, both individually and collectively, to speak our minds, to find paths that increase justice and equity, and to continue to work to build a world that mirrors back that divine spark we each carry within us. We ask you to join us as we strategize our next steps here with Smol Emuni US, and we invite you to join us in that work moving forward. Thank you for being here. We're going to close with Cantor Shimon joining us for some final music. Thank you for being here. Cantor.
למען החי ורעי, למען החי ורעי, אדברנה, שלום בך, למען החי ורעי, למען החי ורעי, אדברנה, שלום בך, למען בית אדוני אלוהינו, אבקשה טוב לך, למען בית אדוני אלוהינו, אבקשה טוב לך.